friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Russian oil, oil refineries. Because oil refineries, Russian resources, Russian oil and gas is the engine of the special military operation, at least according to the Western intelligence. If Russia lose oil refineries or lose their trade capabilities with this resource, most likely the Russians would be forced to slow down or even to stop the special military operation. And there are two ways how how the Western countries can do this. The first one is sanctions against Russia itself and the Russian shadow fleet. And the second approach is to attack all these oil refineries with missiles and drones. And since the beginning of this year, Ukrainians carry out a lots of attacks against Russian oil refineries, and we had lots of videos and photos of damaged oil refineries all over the entire territory of the Russian Federation. And as we can see, the Ukrainians managed to find a solution how to attack all these oil refineries deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. For example, this attack took place in the central part of Russia in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Ufa. And the next strike, for example, took place a bit further in the north, somewhere around the settlement by the name of Kizel. Here we don't see the drone itself, but according to information we have, this building was pretty damaged by Ukraine attack. For example, this video we got from the settlement by the name of Saratov. This attack took place on the 20th of September, and as a result of this attack, also another oil refinery of the Russian Federation was damaged. So if the Western countries and Ukraine combine all their activities together, the Western countries imposed additional sanctions, the European countries improved their, let's say, situation in the Baltic Sea, in the sea, with the purpose to make additional checks or additional investigations against Russian, let's say, shadow fleet. And if Ukrainians intensify their attacks against refineries, most likely this situation could bring significant results, and the Russians most likely would be forced to change their, let's say, approach to the special military operation and to the situation in the world. But the problem the Western countries is that they don't know, or they can't synchronize their actions. The United States of America still hasn't imposed additional sanctions. The European countries continue buying oil, and Ukraine doesn't have enough of weapon to attack and to destroy all these oil refineries altogether. And the problem is for Western countries is that Russia uses this time, because when the Russians see that there is a problem, they try to find a solution how to resolve this issue. And for example, today pro-Russian resources published this video, and here we can see how Russians are trying to build a real shelter around and above another oil refinery in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Samara. As you can see, the Russians are trying to build something similar to the protection nets around main logistic roads, but when talking about this situation, the constructions are much bigger, and we're talking not about just regular material, we're talking about probably steel, we're talking about very strong constructions that can probably protect these refineries not just from the Ukrainian FPV drone attacks, but maybe even to protect these oil refineries against the missiles of, let's say, Tomahawk type. So once again, the Ukrainians and the Western countries still haven't managed to probably synchronize their actions against Russia, and we see that the Russian Federation have already found a solution how to reduce the damage that the Western countries and Ukraine can damage and can deal to the Russian Federation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians took additional buildings, streets and constructions in the northwestern part of the city of Kupiansk. So this is the situation by the end of the 29th of September, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 30th of September. This information was provided by pro-Russian resources and by neutral mappers. So as we can see, the battle for the western and the northwestern parts of the city of Kupiansk is about to be finished. And if this information is correct, and if this is the reality that we can see on the ground, most likely Ukrainians in the western part of the city of Kupiansk were caught in cordon without any chances for evacuation. I'm not sure that Ukrainians can use this road for evacuation. Maybe soldiers can do this, but not obviously vehicles. The Ukrainians, if they want to survive, they would be forced to abandon their vehicles, tanks, and so on, and to leave this part of the city of Kupiansk in the eastern direction, which is also not a very good option because the eastern part of the city of Kupiansk is located on the Russian side of the river Voskol, which means that then they're gonna have to move further in the southern direction and then back to the western bank. So the Russians will continue offensive operation. I believe the Russians are not going to move further to the east. The Russians will continue offensive operation in the southern direction with the purpose to get as close as possible to the settlement by the name of Sadova. If Russians can get this territory of the city of Kupiansk and the Kupiansk agglomeration, we can say that Ukrainians would be caught completely in cordon without any chances for evacuation. And I would like to remind you that according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, this territory was already captured by Russians by the end or by the morning of the 30th of September of 2025. We still haven't received anything that can confirm this, but at least we see that the Russians are moving in this direction and that the Russians are tasked to do this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in another area of responsibilities of the group of forces west, the southern Kupiansk direction or the Lyman direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their positions significantly. If you remember, just yesterday, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the group of forces west managed to secure the settlement of Shandrigalova, and today, this morning, we got additional videos of how exactly the Russians were fighting for this territory. We got additional episodes of how Russians were bombing the settlement, clearing the buildings, clearing basements, moving from one building to another, and how Russians were raising flags in different parts of the settlement. So no doubt, the Russians established complete control over the territory, and most likely after a very short regrouping, the Russians will continue moving further in the southern and the southwestern directions, and most likely for battle for the settlement of Drobyshevo is about to start. But this flank is not the most important flank of the Lyman direction. The most important updates are coming from the northeast of the city of Lyman. We are talking about the settlement by the name of Zarechne. Yesterday in the evening, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the city, over the village by the name of Zarechne. So the village was captured and secured by Russians, and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map and we colored the entire settlement under complete Russian control. This morning, several pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians counterattacked the settlement in its southwestern part and in its northwestern part with the purpose to answer the village itself, and most likely to establish or to install flags in these parts of the village with the purpose then to make a video and then to show that this video to us with the purpose to blame Russians that they haven't managed to establish complete control over the territory. So those counterattacks were carried out by the Ukrainians right after the Minister of Defense reported about complete control. The Russians are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes on the outskirts of the settlement of Zarechne. The Russians are trying to repel these attacks with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to answer and to install their flag. Most likely today there are going to be very heavy clashes, and we believe that Ukrainians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to answer the village and to make another media victory. So we'll see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is very difficult, and as soon as the Russians repel every single attack from the Ukrainian side, they will begin their own offensive operation, and this time in the direction of the city of Lyman. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Siversk. This morning, the pro-Russian resources and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Malay Siversk. So we are talking about this territory. Today we will try to clarify where exactly where the Russians were discovered, where the Russian forces were recorded, and as soon as we get additional information we will color the territory, but most likely we will color this entire pocket to the east of the settlement of Dronovka, the territory between the river of Seversky Donetsk, the city of Siversk, and the settlement of Serebryanka. So this is very important piece of news because now we see that the Russians have a very strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Seversky Donetsk. And obviously, after the fall of the settlement of Mali Sivers, the Russians will begin offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Dronovka. And if Dronovka falls, this is going to be the beginning of the battle for the city of Siversk itself. So the situation here is very complicated for Ukrainians. We see that the entire line between the settlements of Lyman and Siversk is collapsing. The third battle of the city of Lyman is about to start, and the first battle for the city of Siversk is going to start also very soon. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city by the name of Pokrovsk. The Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, additional videos were recorded of how Russians were bombing the eastern flank of the city of Mirnograd. This is exactly the area where the Russians are planning to answer the city itself. As of now, the Ukrainians are holding their positions, but it seems that very soon the Russians will enter the territory and then the clashes will begin on the territory of the city itself. A bit to the north, the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation, and according to information we have during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. Neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians continue improving their positions to the south of the settlement of Vladimirovka with the purpose now to force the Russians to fall back and to reduce their FPV drone possibilities. Now Ukrainians are trying to outflank the main Russian defense belt to attack the settlements of Koptiv and Shevchenko. If Ukrainians are able to counterattack in this area and to recapture these territories, this can lead to very, very huge problems for the armed force of the Russian Federation. But at the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Sofiivka. So this information today was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian resources and by neutral mappers. Furthermore, we have this video where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking and FPV-droning Russians in different parts of the Shakhovo pocket. Based on this video, we have adjusted this territory. So we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue maneuvering, trying to encircle each other. Obviously, we know just one thing for sure, that both the Russians and the Ukrainians suffer huge losses in this area. The Ukrainians reported that the Russians have already lost 3,000 soldiers. Most likely the Ukrainian resources and Ukrainian soldiers lost the same number. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.